And we see a lot in these verses that there is what Jesus does and what everyone else wants him to do, okay? And that's the tension that I see more and more in this text, is that there is what Jesus does and where Jesus decides to go, and there are people who are around Jesus who tell him that that is not the right way or that is not the right decision, that their plan is better. And there's what Jesus says, and then there's what everyone else says. There's where Jesus decides to go, and there's where everyone else wants him to go and expects him to go. And there are people in this text that are going to believe that he is the Son of God, and there are going to be people who are going to seek to arrest him, to harm him, and to kill him. And there are tensions that are building in this text because all of these events are within just a few days of Jesus approaching Jerusalem for the last time, okay? And just a few days from John chapter 11, we will see Jesus going into Jerusalem for the last time and being ultimately crucified there. And I look back over my notes from last week, and it was amazing how everyone in the text has been disagreeing with Jesus. That there was the obvious disagreement between the Jews and the temple and Jesus, which resulted in their violent disagreement, and that was that they wanted to do what to him? They wanted to stone him, and then after they wanted to stone him, they wanted to arrest him, so that was a big disagreement. Then there are the sisters of Lazarus who send him a message in John chapter 11, verse 3, that Lazarus is sick and you need to come. And there are the disciples who disagree with Jesus, who, when Jesus went to the other side of the Jordan after he leaves Jerusalem where they were wanting to kill him, and he goes to the other side of the Jordan, and he tells the disciples, we're going to go back to Judea, what did the disciples say? Well, did they agree with that idea? No, they didn't want Jesus to go. They thought that if they went with Jesus, they were going to die. And you remember what Thomas said, right? Thomas said, let us go and die with him. You know, so the disciples think that when they go over the Jordan River and back into Judea, that they're going to be killed. So a lot of the people in this text, when they are having a conversation with Jesus, or Jesus says something, or does something, or goes somewhere, there's a lot of disagreement when it comes to what Jesus is doing in this text. And it kind of sounds familiar, because we want a Jesus that will follow us instead of a Jesus that we follow. And I think that hits us home, because a lot of the times whenever Jesus says something, the people who are following Jesus disagree with him. And I think that that is the case when it comes to us as well, when it comes to particular aspects of our life. That we want Jesus to mold to our shape, and we want Jesus to agree with us, and not the other way around. So that's not how following Jesus works. If you're following Jesus, you're following Jesus. You're not making your own path and doing your own thing. You're following him. So when Jesus says, let's go to Judea, the disciples, yes, they go, but they're saying, we're going to die. You know, so they have all these different ideas when it comes to what Jesus says. And it really amazes me that in just a few days after this, from John chapter 11, that Jesus is going to be arrested in the very next week and tortured and ultimately hung on a cross. In chapter 12 and verse 1, you see the countdown. In chapter 12 and verse 1, what's the time period that you see in chapter 12 and verse 1?
6 days.
It's 6 days before the Passover, all right? You remember what happened when Jesus died on the cross? He died the day before the Passover because they came to break the legs of the people who were on the cross, and they wanted to get him down off the cross before the Passover, right? So you have 6 days until the Passover. That's the Passover where Jesus will be buried. Okay? So you are not very far from the account of the crucifixion when you come to John chapter 11. You are 2 weeks out from the crucifixion of John chapter 11. So the encounter at Bethany, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, Jesus even says, I am glad that I was not with Lazarus when he died, so that you might believe. So what Jesus is going to do when he gets to Bethany, whenever he's surrounded by all these people and Lazarus is dead, is going to help them when it comes to their faith, because just in a few more days, Jesus is going to die, okay? And for them to see Jesus raise someone from the dead, that would bring a great and tremendous amount of faith. Now, once again, it's not going to get them to the point where they should be. It is going to help them, all right? So anyway, lots of stuff in this text. So let's begin to read. We'll start reading in verse 17. I know it says verse 1 up there, but let's do verse 17. John chapter 11, verse 17. When Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been dead in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. And many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, She went and met him, but Mary remained seated at the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he dies, yet he shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. When she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb, and it was a cave. A stone lay against it, and Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said on this account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you have sent me. When he said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he had done, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. Not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who were scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Jesus, therefore, no longer walked openly amongst the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with his disciples. Now, obviously, we won't get through all these verses, all right? So let's start in verse 17. Now when Jesus came, and I know this is going to stop right there for a second. When Jesus came to where? It's a city outside Jerusalem. To Bethany, or to Judea. Okay, where did he come from? Chapter 10, verse 40, the other side of the Jordan. That's like 20 miles away, okay? So you got Jesus coming from the other side of the Jordan into the land of Judea to the outskirts of the city of Bethany, all right? He had left Jerusalem and Judea because the Jews wanted to kill him. He was sent a message by Mary and Martha, all right? Lazarus was ill. Jesus waited 2 more days after he got the message and then made the 2-day trek back across the Jordan River into Judean territory all the way to the outskirts of Bethany. And once again, this trek into Judea was so dangerous because what did the disciples say was going to happen? What did they think was going to happen when they went back into Judea? They were going to die. That's how dangerous this trek was from the other side of the Jordan into Judea. The disciples thought that they were all going to die. And Thomas says, let us go and die with him. Now I want you to remember that. The disciples thought they were going to die when they got back to the outskirts of Jerusalem. Bethany is a stone's throw from Jerusalem, okay? So Bethany is not that far away from the very city that tried to kill Jesus when he came to the temple. The very place where they tried to arrest him, the very place where they tried to stone him. So when Jesus came to Bethany, he found Lazarus already dead and in the tomb for 4 days. Now, is it news to Jesus that Lazarus is dead? No. What conversation did he have across the Jordan River when he was in the other territory across the Jordan with the disciples? Your friend, or our friend Lazarus is, well, he said asleep, but after that he talked plainly, And he said, our friend Lazarus is dead. So Jesus knew that Lazarus was dead. The first time he said, yes, he's fallen asleep. But he plainly told them, Lazarus is dead. Before they ever crossed into the territory across the Jordan, what did the disciples know? Very plainly from Jesus, what did the disciples know? He's dead. Lazarus is dead. So Jesus knows Lazarus is dead. The disciples already know Lazarus is dead. Everyone traveling with Jesus knows that Lazarus is dead. And Jesus is not to the town of Bethany yet. I don't want you to picture Jesus showing up at the house of Mary and Martha, because that's not what happens. Jesus is not in town yet, all right? He is approaching Bethany, but none of these events yet happen inside the town of Bethany or at the house of Mary and Martha. Martha will meet him outside of the city of Bethany. I want you to remember this. Martha is going to meet him outside the city of Bethany. So let's go through the details and see why this is important. Lazarus has already been in the tomb for how many days? 4 days, right? I'm amazed at how much I try to read the Bible through 21st century eyes. Have you ever seen this before when it comes to your reading? That you try your best to figure out what's going on because you're reading it through 21st century culture? We see death and the process of death through our eyes. Because when someone dies in our culture, we have a cultural action when it comes to that, right? And the way that we work when it comes to our culture is that when someone is buried, it takes a few days. Burial is not immediate at all. We have the process of the coroner being called, the funeral home being called, embalming or cremation, whatever, then the day of the scheduled viewing when a lot of people come together, usually a few days after that, and then a few days later, there's the burial. When someone dies in our culture, the burial is not usually immediate. In our culture, it's not hours after death. Now, when a Jew died, it was a very quick process. And I'll give you an example. You remember the example of Ananias and Sapphira? Acts chapter 5. You remember that? Why'd they get in trouble? They lied to the Holy Spirit. You don't do that, right? So they lied about selling the land that they had for such and such a price, but they kept back some for themselves and said they sold the whole thing, gave the entire thing to the apostles later at their feet. That didn't happen, right? So whenever Ananias comes in, what happens? Well, you know the story. He dies. Sapphira comes in 3 hours later. You remember what Peter said? Behold the feet of them who buried your husband. Now, how many hours is that? There was 3 hours between Ananias coming in and Sapphira coming in. And what is Ananias already? He's dead in the ground. He's already buried. So you have 3 hours. Ananias comes in, boom, he's dead. They've already buried him. Sapphira comes in 3 hours later. Ananias is already in the tomb. You ever been to a 3-hour after-death funeral? See, that's a little different, right? When you look at the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 22 and 23, there is this very interesting law about criminals under the Jewish law. They had to be buried the same day. If they were executed one day, they had to be buried the same day. They buried people very quickly, right? But the burial of the Jews who died was very quick compared to our culture. If you remember the death of Tabitha, also known as what? What was her other name? Dorcas, right? You remember her? The woman who was known for her good works and known for her great charity. And we're given a glimpse into the preparations of the dead. Tabitha died. Dorcas died. She became ill and she died. And they washed her body. This is what the Bible says in Acts 9, verse 37. They washed her body, they wrapped her, and then they placed her in an upper room. So the washing of the body would have been the process of the packing and the wrapping, okay? You remember what they did with the body of Jesus? They packed the body of Jesus with pounds and pounds of spices before they put it in the tomb, all right? There would be all types of perfumes and myrrh and all types of things that were put into this wrapping. Now, you obviously know why that is the case. Because after a while, something dead begins to smell. Stink. One Jewish historian said that between death and burial was only a few hours. So, if you died during the night, you would be buried before lunch. If you died at lunch, you'd be buried before mid-afternoon. Is that how we read this text when it comes to someone dying? No, when we think of someone dying, we're like, well, they'll have, 2 or 3 days, then they'll have a funeral. That's not how it worked back then. Most bodies were buried the day that they died, usually within a few hours of their death. More than likely, Lazarus died very soon after the message of the sisters reached Jesus in John chapter 11, verse 3. And when Lazarus died, there was almost an immediate burial, probably mostly because of the customs of the day. But we also saw that Lazarus had a period of mourning during this time by all those who loved him, and that would have been a lot of people because, as we see, there were still people 4 days after he died coming from Jerusalem to console the sisters. And the reason that you know that Lazarus had this viewing, if you will, a few hours after his death, is because what happened whenever he was raised? What did they have to take off? What did they have to take off? The wrapping. Lazarus was wrapped. Now, you know what they wrapped them in? Yes, they wrapped him in cloth, but what was also in the cloth? All the myrrh, all the spices, all the things that they put around the body when it came to the smell. So, Lazarus was, like Tabitha, like Dorcas in Acts chapter 9, Lazarus would have been viewed for a period of time and then placed into the tomb just like Tabitha was. So, there's this period of mourning because Lazarus was wrapped, all right? Lazarus was, as all these other bodies that we see, was wrapped. So the wrapping implies that the body of Lazarus has been packed with spices and perfume. His body was for viewing. There would have been a time for viewing from family. And as far as we can ascertain from Jewish custom as well, rabbis of the first century, the body was placed in the tomb just a few hours after death. All right? You also know about the culture of mourning when it comes to the Jews. All right? In various Old Testament passages, we have wailing women that would go before a procession of a funeral. There would be people who were paid to come and to wail at a funeral, all right? So you have all these things that are happening within the last 4 days. All of these processions, when it comes to the funeral, when it comes to the people who are mourning, all these things that were happening, all these things were probably done by the time Jesus gets to the outskirts of Bethany. Because, as we know, when it comes to the text, how many days was Lazarus in the tomb? 4, by the time Jesus showed up. So usually, as far as what we learn from history, as far as the culture that we know, 3 days of mourning when it came to this, and basically the procession of mourning was over after that. Another thing that amazes me, that connects to this as well, is usually about a year after somebody died, they would unbury them, or they would roll the stone away. Now think about this for a second. Why would they unbury someone? Why would they roll the stone away and go back into a tomb? Think really Old Testament.
They take the bones and they put them in a...
They took the bones. You remember? Joseph, when he died, what did he ask his sons to do? Take his bones to the land of Canaan. You ever wonder how that was? Because whenever someone was buried, a year or even after a year, they would roll the stone away and they would take the bones and put them in a box. And usually when it came to that sepulcher, and there have been many excavations about this archaeologically in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem, there would be boxes of these bones that were stacked into the back of the sepulcher. So after someone died, they would take the bones, put them in a box, and they would put them on the back of the sepulcher. Why would they do that? Well, you know as well as I do. Make more room. You have a family sepulcher. So when the family bones were all that were left, they would go in and put the bones into a box, and they would put the box at the back of the sepulcher. If you were a fancy person, a royal person, someone who was very powerful, just like Caiaphas, as we mentioned in our text, they have entire tombs of Caiaphas' family stacked in boxes that are very, very ornate. So, it's totally different than what we do when it comes to us. Can you imagine after a year exhuming the body of the people that you have put into burial plots? Taking their bones, putting them in a box, and then storing them somewhere else? Does that sound a little weird to you? Well, it wasn't to them. That's what they did. Anyway, any questions before we get into the text some more? I'm sorry, I got on a rabbit hole when it came to that one. Sorry. All right, let's get back to attention for a second. Jesus has now come to the outskirts of Bethany, and I really want to drive this point home. He is not into the city of Bethany yet. He is not to Mary and Martha's house. He is not to their house yet, okay? Jesus knows that Lazarus has been in the tomb and has been in the tomb for 4 days. The burial has already taken place. The wrapping of the body has already taken place. Lazarus is in the tomb. The stone's been rolled in front. The viewing has already happened. The neighbors, the procession, the wailing, all that. All of the burial stuff was over. And the community was basically now just coming to console the sisters. And it says that many of the Judean Jews had come to Mary and Martha to console them about their brother. I just want to stop here for a second, and we could talk about this for a long time. We all process grief very differently. And we process grief very differently in 21st century America than they did in first century Judaism. Everything is very quick these days. Would you agree? I mean, just in my generation, I have seen things condensed down even more and more. You're in the funeral business, you know. I mean, it is very efficient, all right? Like there is maybe an hour, maybe two, and then it's like funeral home, graveyard, done. So the Jews, they buried their dead very quickly, okay? But they didn't just go home after that. They buried their dead quickly, but they mourned for a very long time. I mean, just imagine this is 4 days after a viewing. Imagine, 4 days after a viewing, and you still have people coming. And we'll get to this in the next little section. But if you have been through 4 days of viewing with a bunch of people coming, how do you feel? If you had a 4-day long visitation, how would you feel? Would you like some overtime if there's a four-day visitation? 4 days. Can you imagine people coming for 4 days? And people still were coming to console Mary and Martha 4 days after Lazarus was in the tomb. And I want to tell you this. Mary and Martha had to be exhausted. I mean, they had to be exhausted. Physically tired, mentally tired, emotionally drained. This is 4 days after they lost their brother, all right? And there are even more people that are coming on the 4th day from Jerusalem. And the family is loved by a lot of people. I'm not knocking that at all. They had connections and compassion that went throughout the community of Bethany and on into Jerusalem for people who were coming to them. But then Martha hears that who's coming? Jesus. This is a very big point. This is before Jesus ever gets to Bethany. And before Jesus ever sets foot in the village. All this conversation that happens between Martha and Jesus happens outside the village of Bethany in chapter 11, verse 30. Not everyone is privy to this information that Jesus is coming to Bethany. Now, you know where I'm going with this, because what did the disciples say? Whenever they left from across the Jordan, what did they say? We're all going to die. Martha goes out to meet Jesus away from her house and away from the entire city of Bethany. They're not even in the city. They have a conversation in private about Jesus being on his way. You want to know the amazing thing? What about Mary? Did you catch that in the text when we read it?
She's still in the house or something.
She's still in the house, but the conversation that was had with Mary, Martha came to her privately. And they both then went out to see Jesus outside of Bethany. Not around their house, outside of Bethany. Apparently none of the other Jews that were there knew that Jesus was on his way. Martha goes out to meet Jesus, away from the crowds that are coming from Jerusalem, away from everyone who had gathered there at the house. One commentary I was reading really piqued my interest with a very good question that I don't know the answer to. Did Martha know the danger that Jesus would be in? I ask you that because what did the disciples say whenever they left? We're going to die when we get to Judea. Martha leaves her house and goes to meet Jesus on the road coming in. She's not in Bethany. Why did she come back to Mary in private? Just ask yourself the question. Martha, who has just been through a 4-day visitation, goes outside of her home, outside of her city, and meets Jesus. She then goes back to the house in private to get Mary, to take Mary outside the city to meet Jesus. Is that kind of weird to anybody else? What did the Jews think Mary was going to do? You remember? When they saw Mary leave, where did they think she was going? To the grave, to the tomb, to cry, to weep. Here's my question, the question that this guy asked too. Was Martha concerned with the danger that Jesus was in? I'm sure she knew. Living so close to Jerusalem during that time, hosting so many people during that time, being one of the prominent people in that community at that time, I'm sure she knew all the stories that came from people coming from Jerusalem about how they tried to kill Jesus, wanted to arrest Jesus. She knew, just like every other Jew that was there, if you were connected to Jesus, you were probably in trouble. Because what did the disciples say? We're going to die. Thomas says, let's go die with him. So as exhausted as Martha was, as fatigued as she was, she goes outside of Bethany to find Jesus before Jesus got there. Martha finds Jesus first. She leaves her house. She leaves those who are consoling her. She goes outside of Bethany to meet Jesus on his way while Mary remained in the house. Here's my question too. Was Martha protecting Mary the first time she went? You know what Martha is. When we were introduced to her, what was she doing in the house? What was she doing? She was cooking food. She was working. She was cleaning up messes. She was working, okay? Can you not see Martha as like that mother hen? If she knew there was danger for Mary, do you think that she would go first and figure it out? She goes first. Then she goes back to get Mary in private. There's a lot going on here. I mean, the disciples think that they're going to die. At some point in this trip, they're going to die. Okay? Obviously, they hadn't died yet, so what are they still thinking? I mean, this is a big point. They haven't died yet, so what are they still thinking? At some point in time, we're going to die. Mary comes to Jesus in private. Martha comes and gets her before that. The disciples are looking around for an ambush. That adds more tension. So, before we get to the first conversation, that's all we got to. I'm sorry I didn't get any further. Any questions, comments, things that you saw in the text? Things that jump out? All right, let me ask you a question to get into this. When you think of Mary's discussion with, or Martha's discussion with Jesus, what do you think about? How has it been explained? I had to really think about this. How has Martha explained to you when it comes to Lazarus being dead and approaching Jesus? Well, what is the first thing she says? What's the phrase that she says to Jesus? If you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Okay? Mary says the exact same thing. Actually, it is the exact same phrase. Exact same phrase. Both of these sisters say the exact same phrase as Jesus. Do you think they've been talking about this? If they say the exact same phrase, they've been talking about this. But what is a lot of things projected on Martha when it comes to this right now? Well, you say the phrase out loud and you tell me what it is. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. What does it sound like to you? It's really hard, isn't it? What does it sound like to you?
Well, they loved him, but I don't think they would have been upset with him, like mad at him because he hadn't got there. You know, because both of them loved him,
Yeah.
Where's that go?
Well, I had a conversation today where somebody said, I was explaining this and said that Mary and Martha were complaining to Jesus that if he would have been there, that Lazarus wouldn't have died. And they were complaining. I want to hopefully open your eyes to something when it comes to this.
What Martha says after that, though, is telling about her faith.
Yeah.
So it's, yes, she may be upset, she's upset at his death, but she's so trusting God.
Absolutely.
Jesus.
And that's a lot of the times when I heard this growing up and in sermons, I would hear how Martha was angry, how she was frustrated, how she was basically just an emotional basket case, and she was just falling all over Jesus saying, if you would have been here, if you would have been here. What is the first word that she says? And this is what changed my entire outlook on this. What's the first word that she says? Lord. Now, you start out with Lord. What are you starting out with? It's not that she's starting out with, if you would have been here, what'd she start out with?
Reverence.
Lord, reverence. And you can see that reverence all throughout her explanation of what it is that she's feeling and what she knows. Because we focus in on that one phrase, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. You focus on the first word, Lord. Yeah.
You could have healed him. You could have made it better rather than like a complaint. Like you weren't here. It's just I feel like she had faith that had he been here, he would have healed him.
And I'm glad you heard that because I didn't hear that. When Martha was explained to me, I didn't hear that. I heard the complaining part and the frustration part and the emotional part. But when you look at this is why looking at the entirety of a context is so important, all right? You don't start out with the title Lord unless you know who's in control. Even in a very emotional situation that Martha was in, she knew who was in control. She said, Lord. She was grief-stricken 100%. And she was emotional, yes, yet faithful in her reaction. And you can almost hear the calm in her voice. And it really did challenge me. Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And I want you to notice how calm the next phrase is. Even now, I know. Whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Now, does that sound like somebody that's off their hinges? Does that sound like somebody who is emotionally frustrated with Jesus and letting him have it? Martha goes to find Jesus before he ever gets to the house, before he ever gets to Bethany. And she approaches Jesus and says, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Yet even now, what is she talking about? Describe for me the present tense of Martha right now. When she says even now, she's describing her present tense. What is her present tense? She has lost her brother. She has been in grief for 4 days. Her brother's been in the tomb for 4 days. And people continue to come. She is exhausted. And yet she says, Lord, even now, I know. I don't think that some of us could say that when it comes to losing those who are close to us. Would you have a hard time? Think of the person that you lost that was closest to you. Would you have a hard time saying, Lord, I know? And yet that's what Martha's saying. Yes, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But Lord, I know. I couldn't have said that. Martha displayed way more faith in this situation than I ever did. There's obvious disappointment when it came to Lazarus and his death. And it could be read, Lord, if you had been here with us, which you were not, my brother would not have died, which he did. Mary says the exact same thing, okay? There was hurt, there was disappointment that Lazarus died. Martha explains that even though she is hurting, Lord, even now I know. Whatever you ask of God, God will give. That seems like a really faithful answer. And you put with that the action of Martha going outside the city to meet with Jesus, going back to meet privately with her sister, to come back to where Jesus was outside of the city, to where Jesus is surrounded by a group of guys who are terrified to even be in the region, thinking that they're going to die. Martha has a whole lot more faith than we give her credit for. And the tension grows. Before Jesus ever gets into Bethany, we're not even into Bethany yet, okay? Before he ever gets into Bethany, before Jesus gets to the tomb, there are Jews in Jerusalem that want to find Jesus. That was their plan, all right? Caiaphas put things in motion already. He said, I prophesy that Jesus will give his life for this nation. That's what Caiaphas prophesied. He has already put things in motion when it comes to the death of Jesus. The Jews in Jerusalem, they still want to find Jesus. The disciples, they still think this is a suicide mission and we're going to die. The sisters have no idea how or if Jesus is going to fix this. Resurrection does not seem to be on anybody's mind. There is nobody in that crowd, even the sisters, that are thinking about what Jesus is going to do in the next few verses. There is a constant stream of people from Jerusalem going to Bethany. Now, why is that a danger? You have a constant flow of Jews coming from Jerusalem to Bethany. Why is that a danger? Because you don't know who's who. You don't know if they're coming to really seek Jesus or to come to find out if Jesus is there. It's only a matter of time before Jews from Jerusalem with hostile intentions towards Jesus make their appearance in Bethany. The disciples, all the time I'm thinking when I was studying this, I'm thinking the disciples are like walking along thinking that there are Jewish snipers around them just ready to pick them off at any time. They think they're going to die very quickly, very soon. And all of this, you have Lazarus. 4 days in the tomb. And Jesus, who performs a miracle so that they might believe. Sorry we didn't get to the resurrection part. We'll get to that hopefully next week. I told you last week we were going to get to the resurrection part. We didn't. So hopefully next week we'll get to the resurrection part. So there's just a lot in this text. A lot in this text. And I hope you're learning from all this as much as I am. So. Anything else before we close? And
Josh went through a clue about Martha before she said Lord. When she saw Jesus, she fell down.
mm,
That's a big clue of her heart and her attitude right there.
it is.